Look at me. The words cut through the noise of the Langford Grand Ballroom like a scalpel through silk. Harper Kincaid, CEO of Kavanaugh Medical Group, stood in the center of the most prestigious medical gala of the year and said those 3 words directly to the one man nobody else had bothered to acknowledge all evening. Dr. Wesley Durant, a 39-year-old black single father in a pressed but aging suit, had been standing near the exit with his invitation held loosely in one hand, already deciding it was time to leave. 2 colleagues had passed him moments earlier, one whispering to the other that someone must have sent that invitation to the wrong address. Wesley had heard it. He always heard it. He had turned toward the door when the entire room went quiet, and Harper Kincaid crossed the floor with the kind of certainty that made everyone else step back. She stopped in front of him and said it again, quieter this time, meant only for him. Look at me. If this story stays with you, consider subscribing. New stories drop every week, and every single one is about people who deserved to be seen a long time ago. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between a supply delivery notice and an overdue equipment request that Cedar Ridge had been submitting for the better part of 8 months. Wesley almost missed it. The envelope was cream-colored and heavier than standard mail, with the Kavanaugh Medical Group seal pressed into the back flap. He read his name twice, certain there was a mistake, then set it on the corner of his desk and went back to the patient waiting in exam room 2. He told himself he would deal with it later. Later kept moving. He didn't think about it again until that evening when Mila found it on his desk and held it up with both hands like she'd discovered buried treasure. She was 8 years old and already had her mother's instinct for knowing when something mattered, even when the adults around her were pretending it didn't. She turned the envelope over, carefully read the gold lettering on the front, and looked up at her father with an expression that was equal parts excitement and the particular kind of seriousness that children only use when they've decided something is important. "Dad," she said, "this has your full name on it." Wesley told her it was probably a mistake. He said it gently, the way he said most things to Mila, because she had learned to read the spaces between his words better than most adults ever had. She didn't argue. She just set the invitation down on the kitchen table during dinner and left it there face up where he would have to look at it every time he reached for his glass. He did look at it. For 3 days he looked at it, and on the 4th day he called the number on the back. A woman confirmed that yes, Dr. Wesley Durant of Cedar Ridge Family Clinic had been formally invited to the Kavanaugh Medical Group annual gala at the Langford Grand. The event honored contributions to community health across the entire system. His name was on the list. He still believed there had been some kind of administrative error, but he didn't say that to Mila. The night of the gala, he dropped her off at the neighbor's house with her backpack and her favorite book. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, watching her pull off her shoes at the entrance. Mila looked up from tying one of them and said without any particular drama, "Mom would want you to go." She said it the way she said most true things, simply without decoration, like she was just confirming a fact both of them already knew. Wesley nodded, kissed the top of her head, and walked back to his car. He drove to the Langford Grand with his hands steady on the wheel and something in his chest that he couldn't quite name. He had worked within the Kavanaugh system for 11 years. He knew what he was in the eyes of the people who ran it. He had figured that out gradually, the way you figure out most uncomfortable truths. Not in a single moment, but across 100 small ones. The way certain department heads forgot his name between meetings. The way opportunities were announced and the list of candidates never seemed to include anyone from Cedar Ridge. The way colleagues with impressive institutional affiliations were introduced at conferences while Wesley stood in the back of the room and listened and said nothing, and drove home afterward on roads that no one else would drive at hours no one else would keep. He wasn't angry about any of it. He had moved past anger a long time ago, mostly because anger required a kind of sustained energy he couldn't afford on a schedule that sometimes ran 16 hours. What he felt instead was a quiet, settled understanding of how the system worked and where he fit inside it. Cedar Ridge needed a doctor. He was a good doctor. That had been enough. Or it had been enough until Mila read his full name off that envelope and looked at him like he was someone worth seeing. The Langford Grand was exactly what he had expected. The lobby alone was larger than his entire clinic. Men in tailored suits stood in clusters near the bar, talking with the easy fluency of people who had spent their careers in rooms exactly like this one. And the conversation had the particular texture of people who never had to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. Wesley checked his coat, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and walked toward the registration table holding his invitation in one hand. He moved carefully the way he moved through most spaces that hadn't been built with him in mind. The woman behind the table was Claudia Wren, an events coordinator for Kavanaugh. She smiled at Wesley with the automatic warmth of someone trained to smile at everyone, but something shifted in her expression in the 2 seconds between seeing him and recognizing that he was there alone, in an older suit, without the kind of confident entry that told a room you had been expected. She took his invitation, looked at it, looked at him, then looked at the invitation again. She said there seemed to be a small discrepancy in the registration records. She said she would need to verify with someone. She typed into her tablet with the particular focused attention of a person who has decided that looking busy is preferable to making eye contact. Wesley stood at the table and watched guests move past him into the ballroom, nodding at each other with the ease of people who had never once considered that they might not be on the list. Dr. Felix Lorne was one of those people. He was the kind of physician who entered rooms the way weather systems did, with advance notice and a clear expectation that everyone would adjust accordingly. He had fellowships from 2 of the most recognized institutions in the country, a research portfolio that ran to multiple pages, and a reputation inside Kavanaugh built across years of strategic visibility at exactly the right moments. He also had a way of looking at people that communicated, without effort, the category he had placed them in, and whether that category was worth his time. He walked past the registration table, saw Wesley, and stopped. "Durant," he said. "Not Dr. Durant. Just the last name, the way you address someone you've decided isn't worth the prefix. I didn't realize Cedar Ridge was on the guest list this year." He said it with a smile that functioned as a smile without quite being one. "They must be broadening the criteria." Wesley said nothing. He had a particular kind of silence he used in moments like this, not the silence of someone with nothing to say, but the silence of someone who had learned that saying it would cost more than it was worth. Felix let the moment sit a beat longer than politeness required, then moved on into the ballroom. Claudia looked up from her tablet and said with careful neutrality that she was still having trouble confirming his registration, and that it was possible the invitation had been issued in error. She could place him on a standby list for the reception portion if he wanted to remain. Wesley looked at the ballroom entrance. He could see the edges of the crowd inside the chandelier light moving across suits and gowns, the backs of people standing in the comfortable proximity of those who have never had to earn their place in a room. He thought about Mila tying her shoe and saying what she said. He thought about his wife. He thought about 11 years of doing the work that kept Cedar Ridge alive, and he thought, not tonight. He would not make a scene. He would not give anyone a story to tell. He would go home and Mila would ask him how it was, and he would find something honest and small to say, and that would have to be enough. He folded the invitation once and put it in his jacket pocket. He turned toward the exit. The room changed before he reached the door. There was no announcement, no shift in the music, more like a pressure change, the kind that comes just before a storm when the air decides to do something different. Conversations shortened, heads turned. Harper Kincaid was walking across the ballroom floor, and she was not walking toward the stage. Wesley had seen her photograph in organizational communications. He had never been in the same room as her. She walked past Felix Lorne without acknowledging him. She walked past Claudia Wren's table without slowing. She crossed the floor of the Langford Grand with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already made a decision and was simply completing it. And she stopped directly in front of Wesley Durant, close enough that he could see the steadiness in her eyes. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Not the way Claudia had looked at him searching for a discrepancy, and not the way Felix had looked at him measuring a distance. She looked at him the way you look at something you recognize, something you've been waiting to see clearly for a long time. Then she said it low and deliberate, with no interest in being overheard by anyone except him. "Look at me." Wesley didn't move. He wasn't sure in that moment whether she was asking him to stay or asking him to understand something. Maybe those were the same thing. He looked at her and she held his gaze without flinching, and the exit was still 10 feet behind him, and his daughter had said what she said in that doorway, and his wife had believed in him in a way he had not yet learned to believe in himself. He didn't leave. Harper turned and walked back toward the ballroom without looking back to see if he would follow. She didn't need to. Wesley stood at the edge of the room for one more moment. Then he straightened his jacket and walked in. Walking into the ballroom did not feel like a triumph. It felt like stepping onto ice and not yet knowing whether it would hold. Wesley found a position near the side wall where he could see the room without being at the center of it. An old habit, the instinct of someone who had learned to occupy the edges of spaces that weren't entirely sure they wanted him. He held a glass of water he hadn't asked for and didn't intend to drink, and watched Harper move through the crowd with the quiet authority of someone who had already decided how the evening was going to end. People leaned in when she spoke to them. They straightened slightly when she moved on. She had that effect, not intimidating exactly, but clarifying the way cold air clarifies a skyline. Wesley watched her and ran through the familiar calculation. He had not been rescued. He was clear on that because he knew how that story went, and he had no interest in being the man at the center of it. He had been seen maybe, or something close to that, but he had been seen before by people who then used what they saw for reasons that had nothing to do with him. Harper Kincaid ran a medical organization worth several $100 million. She did not cross ballroom floors for sentimental reasons, and he was not going to assume that this was different until he understood what it actually was. He was still working through that when she appeared beside him. She didn't announce herself. She simply stood close enough to speak quietly and said, "You almost made it to the door." There was no accusation in it. If anything, she sounded like someone acknowledging a fact she found instructive rather than troubling. Wesley looked at her directly. "I still think someone made a mistake with the invitation." "No one made a mistake," Harper said. She kept her eyes on the room as she spoke, the way people do when they want a conversation to look casual from the outside. "I approved the guest list personally. Your name was the first one I added." He didn't know what to do with that, so he said nothing and let her continue. Harper told him she had spent the past 2 years reviewing performance data from all of Kavanaugh's satellite clinics, looking for patterns the quarterly reports weren't capturing. Cedar Ridge kept appearing in places it had no business appearing given its resources. Early intervention rates, successful emergency transfers, patient retention in demographics that typically disengaged from the healthcare system entirely. She had pulled the individual case files to understand why the numbers looked the way they did, and the answer across dozens of files and hundreds of individual decisions was consistent. Wesley told her he appreciated hearing that. Then he told her he also understood how evenings like this one worked. Someone gets held up as an example. The room feels good about itself for an hour. Then Monday morning arrives, and Cedar Ridge is back on the list of facilities being evaluated for consolidation. And the person who was held up as an example is back in a clinic that still doesn't have a working ultrasound machine. Harper turned to look at him not with offense, but with the attention of someone who has just received information worth revising for. "That's a fair thing to say," she told him, "and I'm not going to promise you Monday doesn't exist." She let that land. "But I didn't invite you here to make the room feel good about itself. I invited you here because what you've built in Cedar Ridge is the only model in this system that's actually working. And I am tired of pretending the problem is the zip code." Something in Wesley's chest did something he hadn't given permission for, a loosening quiet and inconvenient. He had built his defenses for good reasons, and he knew it. And the most dangerous thing about a well-reasoned wall was how solid it felt, even when it was keeping out the wrong things. He said, "I'm not good at being the symbol in someone else's presentation." "I'm not asking you to be a symbol," Harper said. "I'm asking you to stay in the room long enough to let me do something I should have done 2 years ago." She moved toward the stage before he could answer. The lights adjusted and the ambient noise of the crowd softened as the evening's formal program began. Harper took the stage and did not open with the remarks that had been printed in the program. Wesley could tell because the man in the front row who had memorized those remarks was already frowning. Instead, Harper asked the audiovisual team to bring up a set of files she had submitted that afternoon. The large screen behind her filled not with organizational charts or donor acknowledgments, but with patient records, anonymized, reduced to essential facts, but unmistakable in what they described. She walked the room through 3 years of Cedar Ridge data, not in the language of administration, but in the language of what actually happened to actual people. A 73-year-old man with no health insurance whose irregular heartbeat was caught during a routine visit because his doctor noticed something in his coloring that didn't match the chart, transferred to a cardiac unit in time still alive. A pregnant woman at 31 weeks, caught in a severe storm that destroyed the road between Cedar Ridge and the nearest hospital, stabilized for 4 hours in a clinic that had no business stabilizing anyone that long until the weather broke and the transport helicopter landed mother and child both fine. A 12-year-old boy whose joint pain and fatigue had been dismissed twice by other providers as growing discomfort, eventually diagnosed with a manageable autoimmune condition because a doctor in a small rural clinic had kept following up long after the system said there was nothing left to follow. Harper named no names. She didn't need to. Anyone in the Kavanaugh system who knew Cedar Ridge knew who had been on duty for each of those cases, because Cedar Ridge had for most of the past decade functioned with a roster that was one physician deep. The room was quiet in a way that was different from the quiet at the start of the evening. That earlier quiet had been comfortable, people waiting for something they expected. This quiet had an edge to it, the particular stillness of a room that has just been told something it cannot immediately argue with. Felix Lorne was sitting 4 tables from the stage. Wesley could see him from across the room, and he watched the way Felix's expression moved through mild attention into something harder and more deliberate. Felix was a man who identified threats early and addressed them before they could gather momentum, and Wesley could see watching him that he had just been categorized as one. Harper concluded by saying that the Kavanaugh system had developed a long habit of measuring contribution by the prestige of the institution where the work occurred, rather than by the weight of the work itself, and that this habit had been costing them more than any quarterly report had yet been willing to calculate. The applause that followed was genuine in some parts of the room and mechanical in others. Felix placed his hands flat on the table and did not clap. Wesley stood very still and felt something unexpected, not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. More like recognition, like a thing that had been stored in the wrong place for a long time and had finally been put where it belonged. Felix reached him before the applause had finished. He came across the room with the deliberate pace of a man executing a plan rather than reacting to one. He was cordial. He told Wesley it was a meaningful thing Harper had shared, that community-level clinical work deserved acknowledgement, and that nobody in the room would question that. Then he said with the smile holding steady that there was a meaningful difference between a physician who was excellent with patients in a resource-limited setting and a physician with the administrative and academic background required to lead a system-wide initiative. He said that distinction mattered when the resources being allocated were real, and that putting a program of this scope in the wrong hands from the beginning would ultimately hurt the people it was meant to serve. Wesley looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said. The simplicity of it landed in a way Felix hadn't prepared for. He recalibrated, said he only raised it out of concern for the program's long-term success, then excused himself and moved back toward his table. Wesley watched him go and understood exactly what would happen next. The quiet conversations with board members, the concerned framing around due diligence and leadership credentials, the pressure on donors who didn't want their names attached to something that might become a controversy. He had seen the mechanism before. It was efficient, and it was effective, and it left very little fingerprints. Claudia Wren appeared at his elbow. She extended her phone toward him with the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news they want no association with. The screen showed an internal message thread between 2 board members time-stamped within the last 20 minutes. The subject was the evening's program. The body said the Gala had created an unexpected situation and that Cedar Ridge's operational budget would need to be reviewed if the coverage became adversarial. 2 sentences. That was all it took. Wesley handed the phone back without a word. He understood now what Claudia was. Not a villain, not an ally, just a person who had attached herself to the prevailing current and delivered whatever that current required. He set his water glass on a passing tray, found the small award plaque with his name on it that had been placed at his seat during dinner, and set it carefully on the nearest table. Then he walked toward the exit. Outside, the night air was cold and smelled like rain that had not yet decided to fall. Wesley stood at the top of the hotel steps and called his daughter. The neighbor answered first and handed the phone to Mila, and her voice came on immediately bright and present the way it always did. He told her the gala was winding down and he would be home soon. He kept his voice level. He had years of practice keeping his voice level. Mila was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking rather than waiting. Then she said, "Did they say you weren't good enough because you don't have the same degrees they do, Dad?" Wesley closed his eyes. His daughter was 8 years old and she had just named the thing he had spent 11 years learning to carry without setting down. She had not learned those words from him. She had assembled them herself from years of watching her father come home with the particular quiet of a man who had been made smaller in ways he refused to name out loud. He told her he would be home soon. He told her to get some sleep. After he ended the call, he stood on the steps and let the city move below him, continuous and indifferent, and understood clearly that he was not finished, but that he was very, very tired. His phone rang before he reached his car. It was the direct line for Cedar Ridge's after-hours emergency contact, a routing system Wesley had built himself 3 years earlier because the main Kavanaugh dispatch had a documented pattern of deprioritizing calls from rural zip codes. He answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was Ruth, the clinic's most experienced nurse, and she was using the tone she kept for situations that had already moved beyond what calm management could hold together. A storm system had come through the valley faster than the forecast predicted. A section of the old ridge road had given way under the runoff, and 2 vehicles had gone into the ditch near Miller's farm. Several people were injured. The clinic was the only facility within reach. The covering physician Kavanaugh Dispatch had promised for the evening had not arrived and was not, Ruth said with the flat certainty of a woman who had stopped being surprised by this particular failure, going to arrive. Wesley was already moving toward his car. He told Ruth he was 40 minutes out, maybe 35 if the highway was clear to begin triage on anyone already in the building and keep the others as stable as she could. Ruth said she knew what to do. He knew she did. That was the only reason Cedar Ridge had stayed functional on the nights when he couldn't be there. He was pulling out of the hotel parking structure when headlights appeared in his mirror. Harper Kincaid's car stayed 2 lengths behind him the entire drive north. She had not asked permission and she had not announced herself. She had seen him leave, read the direction and the speed of it, and made a decision without consulting anyone, which Wesley would reflect later was entirely consistent with everything he had understood about her over the course of that evening. He didn't try to lose her. It would have been pointless, and some part of him, the part already calculating what the next few hours looked like with only Ruth and 2 part-time aides, was quietly glad she was there. Cedar Ridge at night in an emergency looked like something different from what it was in daylight. The small building with its outdated signage and its patched asphalt parking lot, the building that in the afternoon light looked like exactly what it was. A clinic that had been asking for upgrades for 8 years and receiving apologies instead, looked with its interior lights on and people moving purposefully through its doors like something that mattered. Which it was. Which it had always been. Wesley went through the side entrance and Ruth met him in the hallway with a clipboard, her expression carrying the particular relief of a person who has been holding a situation together by will alone and is now prepared to hand it to someone qualified. She walked him through it in under 2 minutes. 6 patients, 2 from the road, 1 with a probable wrist fracture, 1 with a deep laceration on the forearm needing closure, 3 who had arrived before the storm hit, a 7-year-old girl with a respiratory infection running a high fever, an elderly man named Earl whose blood pressure had climbed to a level that required immediate attention, and a woman in her mid-40s named Sandra whose chest discomfort had been present since that afternoon and who had driven herself to the clinic because she didn't want to be a bother to anyone. The sixth was a farmhand who had walked in through the rain with a gash on his thigh from a section of fencing that had come down in the wind. Wesley went to Sandra first. He spent 4 minutes with her. He asked about the onset, the location, the quality of the sensation, whether it moved, whether it changed when she breathed. He listened to her chest and watched the way she was sitting in the chair, slightly forward, right arm braced against the armrest, the unconscious posture of someone managing pain they have decided is not allowed to show. That was not how people sat when they had indigestion or anxiety, he told Ruth, quietly enough that Sandra wouldn't hear the urgency in it to prepare for a cardiac transfer and get dispatch on the line, "Not possible cardiac," and to tell them he needed a unit within 45 minutes. Then he moved to Earl, and then to the girl, and then to the farmhand, and then to the two from the road. And the clinic organized itself around him the way it always did on nights like this, not because he commanded it, but because he had spent 11 years learning exactly what each person in that building could do and exactly how to ask for it in a way that made them want to give everything they had. Ruth drew blood without being asked for it. One of the aides set up the suture tray before Wesley reached the farmhand's room. The other aide sat with the 7-year-old and kept her calm with a story about a dog, while Wesley reviewed her chart from the doorway and confirmed the medication Ruth had already prepared was the right call. Harper stood in the waiting room doorway and watched all of it. She had spent 14 years in healthcare administration. She had toured facilities, reviewed operational models, analyzed efficiency metrics across dozens of clinical environments. She believed she understood what effective medicine looked like when resources were limited. But there was a distance between understanding something from the inside of a conference room and standing in the narrow hallway of a rural clinic at 11:30 at night, watching a man hold 6 simultaneous situations steady, keeping each patient calm, keeping the clinical picture clear in his own head, communicating with his staff in the compressed shorthand of people who had learned to trust each other across years of nights exactly like this one, and doing all of it without raising his voice or losing the thread of any single case. She had read his file. She had read his numbers. She had not understood until now what the numbers were actually measuring. Sandra was transferred out within the hour. The farmhand's leg was cleaned and closed with 12 sutures. The 7-year-old's fever broke just before midnight, and her mother sat in the plastic chair beside the exam table and cried with the specific relief of a parent whose fear has just been given permission to leave the body. Wesley crouched to the child's level and told her she had been very brave, and the girl said she knew, and her mother laughed through the tears. And that small, ordinary moment filled the room the way warmth fills a cold space completely from every corner. Earl's blood pressure came down steadily over 90 minutes. Both patients from the road were treated and discharged before 1 in the morning. The waiting room was empty. The clinic was quiet. Wesley sat on the edge of the supply desk in the back hallway and looked at nothing in particular. Ruth brought him coffee without being asked and patted his arm once, the way she had been doing after difficult nights for the better part of a decade, then went to finish her documentation and left him alone with the sound of the rain slowing outside. Harper came and stood nearby. She didn't sit. She looked like someone who had arrived at a destination she hadn't known she was traveling toward and was still working out what it meant to be there. "The woman with the chest pain," she said. "You knew before any of the tests came back. The way she was sitting," Wesley said. "And she told me it had been building since afternoon. She almost didn't come in." He drank the coffee. "That's how it goes out here. People wait because they don't want to be a burden, and then they come in when it's close. And if someone is here who knows what to look for, they make it through." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. The other half of it had already been said clearly and in public less than 4 hours ago, by the woman standing in front of him. Harper said she wanted to offer him the directorship of the Rural Care Initiative. Formal title, real operational budget, genuine authority to make decisions rather than submit requests and wait for committees to disagree. The program would be structured around what he had built at Cedar Ridge and extended across 12 rural sites within the Kavanaugh system. Wesley had known this was coming from the moment her headlights appeared in his mirror on the highway. He said, "Felix will move against it." Felix's role in this organization is under active review, Harper said. What happened tonight was not the first time. I've been building that file for 8 months. Tonight finished it. He nodded. He believed her. Then he said, I don't have the credentials the board is going to expect to see on a program of this size. The board is going to see 12 clinics that function the way this one does, Harper said. And they are going to stop asking about credentials. He looked at her then directly in a way he had avoided all evening, because there had always been something else requiring his attention. She was tired. He could see it now in the ordinary light of the clinic hallway, without the formal architecture of the Gala around her. She had been carrying weight for a long time, too. Not the same weight, but weight. The particular exhaustion of someone who has spent years in rooms full of people waiting for her to make a mistake they could use. He recognized it. He knew what it cost to keep showing up anyway. He said, I want Cedar Ridge protected before anything else is announced. 5-year guaranteed operational budget minimum. Staffing commitments that aren't tied to quarterly performance reviews. I'll have the terms drafted by Thursday, Harper said. And the decisions have to actually be mine. Not advisory, not subject to reversal every time someone with a longer title disagrees. That's what directorship means, she said. Wesley was quiet for a long time. The clinic held its nighttime sounds around them, the hum of the refrigeration unit, the distant scratch of Ruth's pen, the rain outside finally settling into something gentle. He thought about Mila, about what she had asked him on the phone, about the answer he had not been able to give her honestly. He thought about his wife, about what she would say if she were sitting beside him right now. She wouldn't say anything complicated. She would just look at him until he stopped making excuses for not wanting the things he deserved. He set the coffee cup down on the desk beside him. Okay, he said. It was not a dramatic word. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like something settling into a position it had always been meant to occupy, quietly, without ceremony, the way the right things often happen when no one is performing for an audience. Harper nodded once. She looked like a person who had been waiting to hear that word for considerably longer than just tonight. Many months later, Cedar Ridge was not the same building. The waiting room had new chairs and a children's corner with a small bookshelf that Mila had partially stocked herself, arriving one Saturday morning with a box of paperbacks and strong opinions about their arrangement. The exam rooms had equipment that functioned without being coaxed or worked around. A mobile unit ran a circuit through the farms and hollows twice a week, staffed by 2 young residents doing their rural rotations physicians at the beginning of their careers who were learning. In that small clinic with its imperfect everything, the kind of medicine that doesn't appear in academic journals, but keeps people alive in the spaces between hospitals. Wesley still drove the roads himself when someone couldn't get in. He still remembered the name of every child he had treated that year. He still came home to cook dinner for Mila, still sat at the same kitchen table where she had once left an envelope face up and, without knowing it, changed the direction of everything. What was different was the thing he no longer carried, that low, settled conviction that his work only mattered in places where no one important was paying attention. Harper came to Cedar Ridge often. Not always in the capacity of CEO, though she was always that too. Sometimes she came the way people return to places that have shown them something true about themselves without announcement, with her eyes open. What grew between her and Wesley was unhurried and unperformed, built on the knowledge of what the other person looked like under pressure, what they chose when the choice was genuinely hard, and what they refused to surrender even when surrendering would have been the easier thing. It didn't need to move quickly. It was already rooted in something that would hold. The following spring, Kavanaugh Medical Group held its annual gala at Cedar Ridge. Not at the Langford Grand with its crystal chandeliers and its cream-colored invitations and its registration tables designed to make certain people feel uncertain about whether they belonged. In the community hall at the edge of the village, where the chairs were mismatched and the sound system required patience, and the people in the audience were farmers and retirees, and young mothers, and Earl, who had driven himself in from his farm wearing his good jacket, and the 7-year-old girl who had been very brave sitting beside her mother in the 3rd row. Wesley stood at the edge of the small stage and felt his hands do the thing they sometimes did. A faint tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with the particular vulnerability of being fully seen by people who already knew exactly who you were. He looked out at the room. Ruth was in the front row. Mila was beside her, sitting very straight in the dress she had picked herself, watching her father with the calm certainty of someone who had never once doubted this moment would come. From the side of the stage, Harper watched him. She saw the moment the steadiness left his hands, and she did what she had done once before in a much larger room when he had been about to walk away from something he had earned. She caught his eye and said it quietly just for him. "Look at me." He did. And then he looked at the room at the village that had trusted him long before any institution did, at his daughter who had known from the very beginning at the life he had built, not despite who he was, but entirely precisely because of it. And he began to speak. Wesley's story is not unusual. It belongs to every person who has ever done meaningful work in a place the system decided wasn't worth watching: the teacher in the underfunded school, the nurse on the overnight shift, the parent holding everything together without anyone noticing the weight of it. Their value does not begin when someone powerful finally looks their way. It was always there. Sometimes it just takes one person willing to cross a room and say, "I see you. You are worth seeing." If that's a reminder you want to carry with you, subscribe and come back next week. There's always another story about someone who deserved to be found.